For generations of rugby supporters, there were few sights more powerful than the All Blacks arriving in South Africa for a full tour, carrying the weight of history, rivalry, pride, and expectation with every step. Now, after almost 3 decades, that scene is finally returning, and when the New Zealand All Blacks begin their South African journey in Cape Town on August 7th, it will feel like something from another era has suddenly come back to life. Siya Kolisi has described this tour as the kind of experience his generation mostly heard about through stories, and that description captures just how unusual this moment really is. For more than 30 years, international rugby moved toward shorter windows, fewer matches, tighter schedules, commercial pressure, and increasingly controlled tours, but now the greatest rivalry in rugby is taking a dramatic step backwards in time while somehow becoming one of the most modern scheduling experiments the sport has ever seen. The numbers alone tell the story. 8 matches in 6 weeks, 4 against South Africa's leading provincial teams and 4 enormous tests against the Springboks, creating a journey that resembles the classic tours of the 20th century but exists inside the demands of the professional game. It is a format that has not been seen in South Africa for 30 years, and its return is not simply about nostalgia. It is about testing players, rebuilding traditions, giving supporters something they rarely get anymore, and reminding the rugby world that a tour can be much more than 4 matches between 2 national teams. The final test may dominate the headlines, but the road toward it could be just as important. Before the All Blacks face the Springboks, they will take on the Stormers in Cape Town, the Sharks at Kings Park in Durban, the Bulls at Loftus-Versfeld, and the Lions at Ellis Park. For cities, 4 provincial challenges point 4 opportunities for South African rugby to experience the famous black jersey at close range. And that is what makes this tour so different. In the professional era, provincial sides rarely get the chance to host the All Blacks outside a major international window, and for the players involved, these matches could become memories that last far beyond their careers. The atmosphere in Durban will be different from Pretoria. Pretoria will feel different from Johannesburg. Cape Town will carry its own intensity. Every stadium will have its own story, and every home crowd will understand that it may be years before anything like this happens again. The tour is also built around an unusual sacrifice. The traditional rugby championship has effectively been moved aside to create space for this old-fashioned contest, with the same type of arrangement expected when the Springboks eventually make their reciprocal journey to New Zealand in 2030. From 2027 through 2029, the competition returns in its familiar form, but then the calendar changes once again, proving that this is not a one-off accident. It is a deliberate attempt to bring back something that international rugby once considered normal. To understand why it matters so much, however, you have to go back to 1996. That was the last time the All Blacks properly toured South Africa, and the world around them looked almost unrecognizable compared with today. John Hart was leading New Zealand, professionalism was only months old, South Africa was still adjusting to its new democratic era, and the sport was standing on the edge of a completely different future. Sean Fitzpatrick and his teammates arrived with a 36-man squad, and what happened next became one of the most important chapters in the history of the rivalry. The All Blacks won the series 2-1, becoming the first and only New Zealand team to win a 3-test series on South African soil. But the significance of that victory cannot be measured by the scoreline alone. Before 1996, New Zealand had toured South Africa in 1928, 1949, 1960, 1970, and 1976, and every one of those tours ended without a series victory. The history between the nations was complicated, emotional, and sometimes deeply uncomfortable, stretching far beyond rugby itself. But by 1996, those decades of history were colliding with a new professional era, and suddenly the rivalry had a chance to be judged much more simply, by what happened on the field. The final victory in Pretoria closed a 68-year chapter of frustration for New Zealand, and the emotions surrounding that moment showed just how deeply the rivalry had lived inside generations of players and supporters. Fitzpatrick later recalled the narrow margins that defined the series, and one particularly emotional memory captured the weight of the occasion. After the victory, the legendary Don Clark, a great All Blacks fullback who had been unable to win in South Africa during his own era, was reportedly overcome with emotion. For those who understood the history, that reaction said everything. This was never just another rugby tour. It was the completion of a journey that had begun decades earlier. The 1996 squad became known as the Incomparables, and now that name has returned as part of the build-up to this new tour. But perhaps the most fascinating question is whether history can repeat itself in the modern game. Fitzpatrick has argued that a tour like this could provide almost perfect preparation for a future World Cup, because winning repeatedly on the road, managing fatigue, dealing with pressure, and adapting to different opponents is exactly the kind of challenge that separates good teams from champions. A World Cup does not simply ask players to perform once. It asks them to recover, adjust, travel, and perform again week after week. That is exactly what the 2026 tour will demand from New Zealand. But there is another side to this story, and it belongs to the supporters. New Zealand Rugby expects thousands of traveling fans to make the journey across the world, with roughly 3,000 supporters expected to follow the tour. That number may sound small compared with the enormous crowds associated with a British and Irish Lions tour, but for a rivalry that normally exists inside a standard international window, it represents something significant. These supporters are not traveling simply for one test. They are traveling for a journey. They will follow their team from one city to another, experience different stadiums, meet local supporters, and watch rugby in a way that international fans have rarely been able to do during the professional era. That is what makes a tour feel like a tour. It creates memories that cannot be packaged into a single weekend. And for the South African provinces, the opportunity is just as meaningful. The Stormers, Sharks, Bulls, and Lions are not there merely to provide warm-up opposition. They are part of the story. Their players will have the opportunity to face one of the most famous teams in world sport, in front of their own supporters, under pressure to show that South African provincial rugby can stand up against the very best New Zealand has to offer. The Springboks have also recognized the importance of those matches. Rassie Erasmus has allowed several players to participate with their provincial sides, ensuring they can experience the unique intensity surrounding these fixtures. That decision tells us something important. These games may sit outside the official test series, but nobody involved is treating them as meaningless exhibitions. They are competitive matches with real emotional value, and for some players, they could become defining nights of their careers. That is the beauty of the tour format. A normal international match belongs primarily to the two national teams. A tour belongs to the entire rugby community. It belongs to the supporters traveling thousands of kilometers. It belongs to the province hosting the match. It belongs to the young players hoping to prove themselves. It belongs to the former players watching from the stands. And ultimately, it belongs to the history of the sport. There is also a practical advantage hidden beneath all the emotion. By the time the All Blacks reach the biggest tests against the Springboks, they will already have spent valuable time in South Africa. They will have played matches, traveled between cities, adapted to conditions, experienced local intensity, and tested their squad depth. That is very different from flying into a country shortly before a single test match. Modern rugby calendars have often forced teams to prepare within incredibly short windows, and that can make international matches feel disconnected from the places in which they are played. This tour changes that. The All Blacks will have to live the experience rather than simply visit it. And that could matter when the pressure reaches its highest point. By the time the two nations meet in the headline tests, neither side will be able to hide behind excuses about unfamiliar conditions or lack of preparation. They will know what the other is capable of. They will have seen the physical demands. They will have felt the atmosphere. And they will understand that the rivalry has been given the space to breathe again. That is perhaps the most exciting part of all. Rugby's greatest rivalry is not just being replayed. It is being reimagined. It combines the romance of the old touring era with the demands of modern professional rugby. It asks whether tradition and innovation can exist together, and whether a sport obsessed with efficiency can still make room for something as powerful as a long journey between two rugby nations. For Siya Kolisi, Rassie Erasmus, the Springboks, and the entire South African rugby community, this is a chance to welcome back a tradition that many thought had disappeared forever. For the All Blacks, it is a chance to create a new chapter in a country where their greatest predecessors endured frustration, pressure, triumph, and history. And for supporters on both sides, it is something even more personal, the chance to experience the kind of rugby adventure that once defined the international game. When the first whistle blows in Cape Town, the result will matter, of course. Every tackle, every try, every missed opportunity, and every moment of pressure will count. But this tour is bigger than the scoreboard. It is about proving that the old spirit of rugby can survive inside the modern professional game. It is about showing that a rivalry built over more than a century still has the power to create something extraordinary. And after nearly 30 years without a proper All Blacks tour of South Africa, the message could not be clearer. Rugby has not forgotten its past, and for 6 unforgettable weeks, the greatest rivalry of them all is finally coming home.